Your story influences your business. This is Wingrove Street, an entrepreneurial leaders podcast where we hear the story behind the startup, brought to you by Melbourne Innovation Centre. Hi everyone, David here. We're very fortunate to have a strong community of amazing entrepreneurs here at MIC who are solving global problems through innovative startup business models. This week, during the Australian Open, where Reground is collecting tons of Lavazza coffee, we had the opportunity to speak with founder Ninna Larsen about her background, experiences, and the establishment scale and 2020 focus for Reground. Ninna and her team have been an excellent addition to our MIC community in Alphington, collaborating with a range of local enterprises solving food and waste challenges, including the Melbourne farmers markets. On to the podcast. Well, welcome to another episode of Wingrove Street, the Melbourne Innovation Centre podcast, where we're really excited to be talking to Ninna Larsen today from Reground and hear a bit about your story and more about the business. And there's some really exciting things happening. So welcome, Ninna.
Thank you.
So I guess we'll jump straight in and Reground, from my perspective, has received some really excellent coverage, and especially it's very topical recently with the Australian Open story.
Yeah.
But just taking a couple of steps back, can you just give us the elevator pitch of Reground and what it is that you do?
Sure. So Reground is a waste educational service. What we do is we collect isolated, source-separated waste streams such as coffee grounds, chaff, and soft plastics, and we collect that and divert that to local end users such as home gardeners, or with our plastics, we take it 4 minutes up the street to a plastics recycler. For us, it's all about source separation and hyperlocal diversion. So we are a service that's collecting but also educating, and that is the difference for us in terms of other waste collection services, but also just a hybrid business, different business model to what is usually how businesses run.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. We're always really interested in the individual behind the business.
Yep.
And so as the founder, tell us a little bit about your experiences, I guess, growing up in Denmark and really interested in your education as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great. Well, I haven't actually talked much about that, but it is a good point because it's actually played a huge part in my thinking. I grew up in Denmark, and in Denmark, I think because of the size of the country, we have been developing or forced to develop processes internally in our society that used waste as a resource, essentially. So the first waste strategies dates back to the early 70s. And ever since then, Denmark has trialed and tested ways to recover waste and to use that as a resource. So innovate with it and create businesses around it, and also communicate to the general public how important it is to source separate. So a great example is my parents' house. We have 8 bins, and that is just common practice. So we don't see that as being harder. It's not worse in terms of the space that the bins take up. It is actually easier. Often when I go back home and I'm like, what bin to put this in? If I have a waste material, let's say it's soft plastics, I will be able to identify which bin it needs to go into easily.
Yes.
Whereas here in Australia, because we usually only have 2 or 3 bins maybe, it's way harder. It creates confusion. So I think that's one of the things that I inherently kind of brought with me to Australia when I traveled down here in 2012.
Yes.
Just this understanding of where you can go as a society in terms of waste. But in saying that, waste wasn't my focus.
Yes.
As you're
Yeah.
saying, with my education, I studied design and cultural economics. And so it was a hybrid degree studying design thinking and the design process.
Excellent.
And economics. So how to run a business, essentially. We had a lot of subjects dealing with, everything involved with running a business. So I think that, even though that education didn't cover waste, we still, like, the processes, the practices of thinking in that way helped me when I then got to Australia and started working in a cafe.
So in this instance, it was really just presenting a context in which to apply those skills that you developed.
Yeah.
And obviously things that you've grown up with. So they're obviously, and I guess that's my question as well, is it deeply ingrained in the culture in Denmark that we value recycling, we understand waste at a deeper level, and the importance of, I mean, just as an aside from that, just prior to Christmas, I was in Shanghai and I was actually really surprised by the sophistication of their separation methods with recycling as well. And there seemed to be, a really good attitude towards having several different plastics, even in a public context. Which was really interesting.
Yeah, I think all countries that are small in scale need, not by numbers of residents or anything, but by land size, are forced to innovate. It's just a given that happens. And I think the other benefit is that you have more collaboration between businesses, government, and then people living in Denmark, for example, because we have to communicate, we have to talk. And when you share in terms of, different levels of society, you just get the best results, the best solutions to problems. No one wants to live near a landfill.
Yes.
No one wanted to live near a landfill in Denmark in 1970s. So, I mean, this will happen in Australia as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where, I completely agree. The best solutions come with a collaborative approach. So it just makes a lot of sense. So take us now to 2012, and what was the inspiration behind coming to Melbourne?
So I wanted to, when I finished my degree, I wanted to go live in a different country, and I wanted to learn English, and I wanted to just have a year off, essentially. And I went to Melbourne. I'd previously worked at the Danish Cultural Institute, where I was introduced to Australia and to Melbourne through some colleagues, and that's actually how I ended up in Melbourne. And not Sydney. I was originally going to go to Sydney, but someone said, you're into culture, why are you going to Sydney? You should go to Melbourne. And I'm quite happy with that, because I think culturally it actually does fit me much better than Sydney.
Well, we're happy you came to Melbourne.
Yeah.
And I think that was good advice.
Yeah.
I think it's a much better fit. So, I mean, obviously we touched on context before. You're in probably one of the preeminent cities in terms of coffee culture in the world here in Melbourne. We're obsessed with coffee. So you're working as a barista.
Yeah.
So how did that come about? And tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So I think, as with any travelers, or almost all travelers that are coming to Australia as a backpacker or as just someone that wants to stay for a year, you fall into hospitality. It's such a great industry to meet people and, facilitate relationships and experience the city. So I wanted to work in hospitality just because I wanted to access people. And I had no prior knowledge of coffee. I didn't even like coffee. And I just happened to get a job at Seven Seeds, which is one of the best cafes in Melbourne, and a really great roastery. So I started working there, and from then on I just kept working in hospitality and learn about coffee, learn about how Melbourne and Melburnians value the taste of coffee and how it's grown and how it's brewed. I think it was a wonderful experience for me, and it's followed me to this day. I mean, this is still the industry I'm in.
And then obviously while you're working as a barista,
Yeah.
you recognize this significant problem and this significant
Yeah.
failing.
Yeah, it wasn't in the early days. It was more so when I started working at Patrick Coffee up in Brunswick East, and that was, I had been working there for close to a year, and I was also starting to get a little bit, and that's what tends to happen, I think, if you don't have other interests or participate in other work. But my brain was just starting to get a little bit bored, and I was looking for things to work on. And I just happened, one of my work days to kind of have conversations with my boss at that time about, what's the issue with the coffee industry, and let's talk about the coffee waste, like what actually happens. And we just started to have conversations about that, and ongoing conversations, and we brainstormed some solutions, and I just went out and tested the solutions.
So how did you test that? Would be fascinating to hear.
Yeah, the way I tested it was I got in touch with Ceres, which is a community garden up in very close to the cafe I worked at. And I just asked the head gardener at the time, would you be able to use coffee grounds in your gardening? And he said yes. And that's actually how we started sort of trialing the service, but also me starting to research what is the best use of coffee grounds? What can it be used for? Are there other avenues I can go down other than, gardening, composting, sort of related stuff? Yeah, and because the model with Reground relies on both ends, I can't ignore what we call the end user, so the community gardens or the home gardeners. I had to become really familiar with both spaces, so both cafes and then also gardening and gardeners, which is a whole different, industry to hospitality businesses and people in that industry.
Yes, definitely. And so, and I guess what were some of the challenges even at that early stage in terms of how and frequency of delivery and how it's delivered and those types of, so I guess the logistics around those initial tests and the trials of.
Yeah, I tested the service over 4 months, and most of it was to learn how quickly the bin that I bought would fill up with coffee.
Okay.
So it was trying to work out that equation. So, it took half a week for this cafe to fill a bin up to the top, and then I would have to wheel that down to Ceres and then dump the coffee. And what I quickly learned was that the cafe produced way more coffee than what I had expected. Okay. And the rate that Ceres was using the coffee at wasn't keeping up with the supply. So quickly and very early on, I was forced to focus pretty much all of my attention on developing a network of end users, because I couldn't just give all of the coffee to Ceres. I had to start distributing to more gardens. So that was actually paused, the whole bringing on new cafes. To grow the model, I had to
there was no supply issue.
No, there was absolutely no supply issue. The issue was people didn't understand the benefits of coffee in gardening, so they were hesitant to try it out. And so what I did was I built up a folder of research that I had to present to them. And then slowly from there on, gardeners started to believe and trust that it wasn't harmful to their garden and to their soil. So that was actually my first headache in terms of the model, was building the network of end users.
So, and essentially educating and building and creating a market. Really,
that's right.
Isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the hardest work I've ever done in Reground was that.
Okay.
So it wasn't actually growing the business or selling to cafes. It was building confidence in everyday people, because everyone can access the coffee grounds. So all I needed to do was just get a handful of people that wanted to take this on a regular basis, so I could be confident in collecting coffee from businesses, because I didn't want to collect waste or coffee grounds that I knew I couldn't give to a sustainable end use.
Yes.
So yeah, I think for a whole year, I dealt more with the end users than with the cafe side of the model. But now that's completely different.
So do you remember through that phase, just to touch on that a little bit more, do you remember a distinct moment or period where you said we've tipped over that edge now where the momentum was starting to roll on that demand side for the product?
I had a spreadsheet, and because the way it works now is that people email us and they just get plugged into a date in our spreadsheet. And that was actually also how it worked back then. And I was like, oh, okay, now I have end users scheduled in for the next 2 months. Now I feel okay with bringing on more people, more cafes, that is. And expanding also the number of cafes we service, because if I collected 3 bins versus 2 bins, I would be giving more coffee to the end user. So they would just receive more coffee, more kilos of coffee.
Yes.
So the exercise for me was really to communicate that and find the sweet spot for when, how many end users do I need, and how much can they take at each delivery. Right now, they receive a ton of coffee. So I could scale quite a bit for them to hit that spot of now it's too much. Okay. Yeah. A ton of coffee is quite easy to handle in a garden with an active compost. But it sounds like a lot.
It does sound like a huge amount of coffee. I just think about how much we produce at home just with our small domestic machine.
Yeah.
And it actually fills up the compost bin quite quickly at home.
Yeah.
But we use it. We're plant mad at our place. So I guess that really leads in nicely to the next question I had, which is around how important is data to the business?
Yeah.
Because I've seen some really nice reports about the amount of coffee you're collecting and how much you're saving from going to landfill. So how important is data in the overall story and the day-to-day running of the business?
It's everything. Data, we are collecting all kinds of data, and it's the way we tell stories. It's the way we prove what we do to our businesses, but also to local and state government. We collect data on how much we collect of waste, coffee, chaff, and plastics, but we also collect a lot of data on behavior because, like I said, we're an education service, so it's in our interest to see that when we educate a business that they actually reduce the amount of waste they create and not just keep diverting it, because that is the top of the hierarchy that we are interested in. It's avoidance and reduction. So we collect so much data to prove that what the methods and the methodology is working. The other thing is, and the reason why it's so important for us to collect data is also because not a lot of focus is being put on education. So the government is talking a lot about diversion and diverting from landfill. But as we've seen with the big recycling crisis, even though we put waste in a recycling bin and feel better about it, it might not actually solve the problem.
Yes.
So that's why we are starting to gather a lot of data so we can actually measure what things work when we want to address the avoidance and the reduction part of the waste hierarchy.
And ultimately influence decision makers.
Absolutely.
I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
At multiple levels.
Absolutely. That is the main goal, is to back the work that we do.
Excellent. And in terms of relationships with government and dialogue and narrative with government, how has that journey been for you?
Well, we are sitting in on a lot of workshops, a lot of strategy sessions, and we do have a say. We are being taken seriously in the context of waste. We are, working with small to medium-sized businesses. That is our market, and that also is 99.8% of the total shareholdings of small to medium to large businesses. So it's a huge market that needs to be addressed, but it's a harder one because they all have unique behaviors that is harder to measure and track. But we're doing that work. We're doing that legwork, and no one has done that before. So that's why I think we are important in the conversation.
Really
and
critical in the conversation.
Yeah. But like I said in the very, very start about how it's all for us, and the beauty of the model in Denmark is that it's collaborative. We are interested in seeing all levels of society, fix this problem, because it is a complex issue. It's not just about business, but business is a great starting point. Businesses, and especially small to medium-sized businesses, employ so many people. And we, through work, could change behavior in our houses and in our families. We're just seeing this conversation as a way to kind of change the system from the bottom and up. Yeah, because unfortunately, the government, federal government, doesn't believe in what we believe in, that this should be
a priority.
Yeah, a priority.
Yeah.
But we are proving them wrong.
Yeah, and I think what's really important is as we go through, I always talk about short political cycles, and what is seen as a priority, that businesses and enterprise can be used as a vehicle to continue that narrative.
Yeah. And
maintain a really consistent message around sustainability and recycling and waste.
Yeah. And I think another point is, and I think that's the importance on, why we are dealing with businesses, is that, once businesses see that this is, and they are seeing this, by the way, now, but that this is better business, not just in terms of the marketing, but also bottom line, like the money they save in being more resourceful with their waste actually makes for a more financially sustainable business. So that's the language we're using, to really be promoting the greater cause, which is that we need to take responsibility in terms of climate change. But, we want to have that conversation in a practical way, which is Reground. Yeah.
So tell me, just to jump onto that as well, about in terms of sustainability of your business. Yeah. And obviously you've built up very steadily over a number of years now. What does the next stage of growth or sustainability look like for your business? And obviously aware that Caitlin joined in 2016, and that would have been, I would imagine, an amazing help in terms of the next level of scale and a bit of a game changer. Yeah. So where to now for Reground in terms of that next step?
Well, we have great plans, but we are becoming or really solidifying our role as a waste behavior expert this year. That's our focus.
Excellent.
Whereas the past few years have been about growth in terms of, financial growth and just growing our services and our offerings. This year is all about the data and working out how to analyze the data we've already got and how we can translate that to methods that we can use to change behavior in terms of reduction of waste. We've just hired 6 months ago our operations manager, who is our accountants told us that the best decision a small business could ever make is hiring an operations manager, and we were like, nah, but it's totally amazing and true that hiring Luke for us was like, now we can start to focus on
strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've been doing all of the hard work.
Well, that was basically forming my next question, is around the fact that you're day to day, you're collecting coffee, you're doing all of that day to day work.
Yeah.
And it's the lifestyle of an entrepreneur. Yeah. That it's the late night strategy sessions. It's the sitting at home over the laptop or the notepad and saying where to next, where you really need time during your working day to be getting through that detail and making sure you really focus consistently. So that's really encouraging to hear that you're able to do that now.
It is amazing that we've come to a point where we can step back and be a little bit more intentional, because the bad thing, which is a blessing, but also a distraction, is all of the opportunities that land in our lap. Yes. And we're like, Yes. But we should start to say no more because we have a focus, and the focus is for us to reduce waste and help businesses, but that's what we've been guilty of for many years now, is to say yes to too many things. We want to collaborate, but the reality is also that in small business, some things are not necessarily relevant to your cause or your purpose. And that's what I think is beautiful about this year for Reground, is that we are very strong-willed now in terms of having a clear focus and working on reducing waste, which is, really all we're doing and have been doing. But now it's just more us doing that 100% and not 60%.
And I think that point that you've made would resonate with any business owner in terms of being able to maintain a clear focus and to be able to say no. And I know I'm very guilty of this myself. You get thrown amazing opportunities all the time. And ultimately what you need is a decision-making framework that you can say, this is what we're in the business to do, and this is what we don't do as an organization.
And it's really difficult because it comes with fear. It comes with a fear of, am I going to miss out on something? Am I going to say no to something that actually was a really, really helpful, relationship or opportunity? But I think when you've done it enough, you're kind of like, you get better at sort of determining what is going to help you and not. So we are still collaborating with universities, with government, and with many businesses, but it's just like all of those weird partnerships that are like not going to help us directly. It's just too bad we're too small. Our team is too small to actually do that.
Yeah, and I think that can sometimes be a product of being really lean. So you think you're able to be agile enough to take on board these partnerships, but at the same time, you need the resource and capability to deliver.
Yeah.
At the same. Yeah.
And for us, it is really about the results. We don't want to be talking about this forever and ever. We want to produce results. We want to create evidence. And that requires, that we don't just strategize, but that we also, implement the strategies at businesses and for ourselves and showcase and analyze the data. And that takes so much time, but it's all a part of that, that full picture of, achieving our goal. But, I think often for us anyways, we've done a lot of talking, and then, that would be really cool to do that. And let's start the process. Let's make the strategy, but we haven't followed through.
Yes.
So we haven't been able to actually, create the results we wanted to do. So that's what we're doing now. It's committing 100% to what we
really focusing on execution. Yeah.
Exactly.
Terrific. So I guess this is a broad question as well, but to our growing audience of the podcast, what can people do to contribute and support Reground?
The best thing anyone can do to help support the mission we're on is to drink coffee at cafes that care about the planet. Okay. And there are lots of cafes that say they do, but don't put their money where the mouth is.
Yes.
The best way to help us and to help the planet is to support the businesses that truly cares. And that is, ask them, what do you do with your waste? Ask them, even it would be great if there was some transparency in terms of what are they paying their staff members. It's all about operating sustainable businesses in the holistic, and ethical, in that full meaning of that word. We need better operators out there. So we need to, that's what we can do as individuals is hold them accountable. And I think, it's kind of like when I say this in a business and startup, sort of scenario and context like this one, it's hard because when you're starting up, it's kind of like you're also just getting there, But with established businesses, there is no excuse anymore. Businesses should take responsibility and implement sustainable practices in their business. And
I think there's enough evidence now to suggest that it makes really good economic sense as well.
Yeah.
There's overwhelming proof that it makes good sense.
Yeah. So drink coffee where there are good operators, because we need more of them and they need more support.
Excellent. Well, Ninna, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you so much for coming in and being our guest. It's been really interesting to learn more about the business. I've learnt a lot today that I didn't already know. So thank you so much for your time, and good luck for the year. It sounds like it's a really exciting year ahead.
It is. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
No, pleasure.
It's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.